We're ready.
All right, Chair Jacobs, you can start the meeting whenever.
Okay, we will call to order the Planning Commission meeting for May 7th, 2020. And we will, due to our circumstances, we will do a roll call to order. Present, Chair Jacobs is here. Dickman? Commissioner Dickman?
Present.
Commissioner Schulak?
Present.
Commissioner Varenkamp?
Present.
Commissioner Wu?
Yep, present.
All right, let the record show that all of the Planning Commission members are in attendance. We'll move on to Pledge of Allegiance. I'll start on. Brad and I had a discussion about this may sound kind of bad at first, but I'll start and lead off. The Pledge of Allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands,
One
one
nation,
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
With liberty and justice for all.
Okay. All right. We will move on to the agenda approval, but before we do that, Brad's going to walk us through some of the formats that we need to do here for today's meeting being remote.
Thank you, Chair Jacobs and members. Thanks for joining us on this Zoom meeting. Interesting times. This is our third official Zoom meeting. We've had two at the City Council level. The second one was better than the first. We're more prepared than ever, so we should be going well today. Mike is at City Hall. He's going to be controlling the PowerPoint. So when Kendra goes through, she'll say, click forward, Mike, or click back. Or if you want to see something, address Mike. He's the one who's going to be able to actually move things. At open forum, as well as the public hearing, we will have an opportunity for people to speak if they wish. And at that moment, I'll let people know that they can dial *9 on their phone. And then they'll essentially have a hand up that Mike can see, and he'll tell us whether anyone wants to speak. He'll then unmute them by reading off their last 4 digits of their phone number so they can speak, and we'll move from there. So that's how we're going to handle it. I do have the enhanced agenda I emailed out to kind of follow along if we choose to. Hopefully that's helpful for people and knowing when to speak, when to not, but it's your meeting, so you can adjust where you're at. So that's, I think, all I have to tee it up. Kendra will do the presentation as normal, and I'm here to help answer as I can. Otherwise, I'm going to stay out of the way.
Very good. Thank you, sir. All right. So I will ask if there are any changes to the agenda from the other members of the commission. All right.
Motion by Commissioner Dickman to approve the agenda as is.
Okay, do we have? Okay, we have a second.
Dean Varenkamp, second.
All right. Thank you. I will call the roll vote. Chair Jacobs votes yay. Commissioner Dickman?
Commissioner Dickman, yay.
Commissioner Schulak?
Commissioner Schulak, yay.
Commissioner Varenkamp?
Commissioner Varenkamp, yay.
And Commissioner Wu? Commissioner Wu? Yay or nay?
Mike, can you see anything on your
I
end?
do not appear to have audio for Commissioner Wu.
So we can continue forward with a 4.
Yeah, okay, so it passed. Okay, we will move on to item number 4 then. Open forum, public comment opportunity.
So
And
Chair,
Brad, you'll be asking if anybody wishes to speak.
correct, Chair Jacobs. So now is the opportunity. It looks like we have one caller who is not staff or commission, who could be an applicant. But if anyone wants to speak on open forum, dial *9 on your phone. There is a public hearing later on related to the one item on the agenda, so there's another opportunity then, but we'll just wait a few seconds. Anyone wants to speak right now, dial *9. Mike, is it just one other person that we're unknown at this point?
Yes, just one.
Okay, so with that, I think we can move forward with no one at the open forum.
Okay. All right, item 5, the minutes from March 5th, 2020. Are there any questions or comments on the minutes?
Nope.
Yeah, I didn't have any comments.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the March 5th minutes.
So moved. Camp.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that, Wu.
Thank you. All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Chair Jacobs votes yay. Chairman Dickman?
Commissioner Dickman abstains. I was not at the last meeting.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Shulak?
Commissioner Shulak, yay.
Commissioner Varenkamp?
Commissioner Berenkamp, yay.
Commissioner Wu?
Yes.
Okay, the minutes from March 5th are passed. Okay, item 6, new business, public hearing, open space and preservation plat for Paulson Farms. And we will look forward to Kendra's report from staff.
Mike, will you be able to throw the
Yep,
presentation?
it's coming up here momentarily.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Tonight, this is a public hearing. Is it just me that's getting back feed? There we go. This is a public hearing for an open space and preservation plat. It's a preliminary plat for Paulson Farms. Next slide, Mike. The project is a 83-acre site that's being proposed for subdivision. The property is zoned rural residential. The subdivision creates 20 new lots and 4 outlots. The 4 outlots are part of the required open space with an open space preservation plat. You may recall that in an open space preservation plat, at least 50% of the land is required to be preserved. And of that preserved open space, at least 50% must be upland. And a change from previous versions when we updated the ordinance, the intent of the open space is preservation until municipal sewer and water are available. And at that time, the open space would be further subdivided at urban densities. And that's at some point post 2040. And just at a high level, the project does a nice job of meeting those open space standards, and we'll talk through the staff reporter with some areas where they will need to revise the plan to address conditions. Next slide is an image, I believe, of the project. Yeah, so this aerial shows the project outlined in blue on County Road 30 and Bechtold Road. And you can see there's a creek that runs east to west through the southern half of the site, and there are wetlands scattered throughout. There's a large forested area in the southwest corner of the site. Next slide, Mike. Wow, that does not show up very well, but this is the preliminary plat laid over the aerial photo. And what it shows you is in the southwest corner, that forested area, as well as trees that run along the creek. And then on the east side of the project, not on this site, is a large wooded area. And so the applicant has done a nice job of preserving the southern half of the site for open space, where it can take advantage of the natural features that are on site. I think you can probably see by the aerial that the site is currently being farmed. The southeast corner of the site would, according to the applicant's proposal, continue to be farmed for an indefinite period, but the other open space areas that wrap around the site, around the perimeter of the site, would be deeded and owned by the homeowners association and would be restored natural areas. Next slide. There are currently 10 development rights on this property, and the code allows doubling of the development rights with construction of an urban street as proposed. An urban street is a street with curb and gutter as opposed to ditches. The lots range from 1 to 4 acres in size. The code has no minimum lot size for an open space preservation plat. It in fact has a maximum lot size of 4 acres. And again, that's in order to encourage developers to cluster the homes on smaller lots so that more of the site can be preserved for ongoing agriculture, preservation of natural areas, and ultimately future development. As I noted on the previous slide, there are 3 outlets around the perimeter of the site that would never likely develop because they're narrow strips that run around the perimeter of the site. Those are outlets A, C, and D. And those will be owned by the homeowners association. Outlot B is really the southern portion of the site, and that would be owned by the developer, and he has indicated that he will continue to farm that portion or part of that portion of the site. Next slide. On the screen now is the preliminary plat. The red boxes that jump out are the septic sites. And in the staff report, I noted that the applicant needed to get Hennepin County approval for that. They did meet with Hennepin County and get preliminary approval of those locations. And there are a couple of modifications that we'll see as it moves forward resulting from that inspection. The applicant has provided the required wetland buffers. What I'd like to point out on this slide is the transmission power line that runs through right there. Thank you, Mike. And so that really does constrict lot 3. And I talked a little bit about that in the staff report. It is a buildable lot, but the person who buys that lot will be restricted in what they can do on the southern 2/3 of their lot under that power line. The power company limits the ability to build structures, limits vegetation that can be planted, limits the ability to run equipment under that site. So something to be aware of for that landowner. That is the one lot that's dramatically affected. Lot 4 has less of an impact. Next slide. So I outlined this in the staff report in more detail. This is a summary. There are 9 criteria that all open space preservation lots should be designed to include. And staff finds generally that the applicant does comply with the goals of these design guidelines. The commission, though, should have reviewed this and should feel free to discuss if other improvements are needed or desired to meet the intent. Next slide. This graphic was in your packet, and it's just a way to show who will own the different open space areas. But it's just a nice clean graphic of where the platted lots are. And then you see a ghost plat on the south half of the site, again, future development. Those lots are larger than they really would be. If this ever got developed, it would be at urban densities. So we may see smaller lots than that, but it is a concept for how that could develop, which is important to let the homeowners here know that development is possible in the future. Next slide. As I said, the developer has received preliminary approval from Hennepin County for the septics with a couple of modifications. One of the things we're learning with these rural subdivisions, and particularly ones with smaller lots, is that it's really important for the developer to do the work to provide detailed grading plans to ensure that when a buyer is found for a lot, there is a viable home site. In the new Hennepin County process to get preliminary approval for the septic sites is an important step. But we've had some areas where people have had trouble fitting the home onto the site and avoiding wetlands and septics. It's all worked, but there have been some challenges. So we've included details that must be provided by the applicant prior to final plat to ensure buildability of all the lots. You saw there are a number of wetlands on site, and that delineation has been approved by the city as the Wetland Conservation Act LGU. No wetland impacts have been shown, and the wetland buffers and setbacks appear to be met. I noted in the staff report, they need to do a little bit of a calculation about some of the stormwater ponds to ensure that the impact in that buffer is within the allowable range. And then wetland buffer monuments do need to be installed per code. Next slide. I mentioned in the first image that there's a ditch that runs east to west through the site, and the city engineers reviewed that and noted in their staff report or in their memo that some stream stabilization may be required because of some of the impacts to the site work. And the plan also shows a trail for the residents south of that ditch, as well as I mentioned, continued farming. So we've asked for additional details from the applicant about how that ditch crossing would be provided for both of those actions. Stormwater management is provided on site, and final design needs to be approved by the city to ensure compliance with local water and state rules. The Parks and Trails Commission will review this at their meeting on the 21st of May. The comprehensive plan showed this site as one of the search areas, athletic field search areas. That was looked at at the staff level, and in light of the recent acquisition of the former Rockford School property, we do not believe that acquiring land at this time from this site is needed, and so staff is recommending cash in lieu of land for the 20 lots. But as I said, the Parks and Trails Commission will review it on the 21st and make a recommendation that will be forwarded to the council. A private wood chip trail is shown on Outlot B. It must show a connection to the neighborhood. It's unclear right now how the neighbors would access that. Additionally, Outlot B is proposed to be owned by the developer, and so there would need to be protections in the homeowners association agreements with the developer to ensure that homeowners can continue to use that trail in perpetuity. Next slide. Hennepin County has reviewed the project, and the applicant is providing the right-of-way recommended by Hennepin County along County Road 30 and recommended by staff along Bechtold. There is no new access. There is no access proposed along Bechtold Road, but additional right-of-way is being acquired for any future improvements there. Along County Road 30, turn lanes will be required. The city will design and construct those turn lanes with developer financing. It's east and westbound turn lanes that we're talking about. The developer will construct new streets within the project. And on the image on the right, you see two red arrows, and those are indicating that the street right-of-way must be extended to the east. Their plans show something called future street right-of-way, but that must be dedicated with this phase. And that does two things. A dedication of that also allows them to make a hammerhead turnaround for where that red arrow is with the public road that's being constructed north and south, and eliminate that temporary cul-de-sac, which is a long-term maintenance issue. So they would do, we've included a condition that they do a hammerhead there rather than that temporary turnaround. And then for the future road that goes south, it's not being platted, but we do want the ghost plat to show that not as a cul-de-sac, but as a future extension. That's planned to be a long-term extension to connect to County Road 10 in Star Wars years, as Brad would say, sometime post 2040. And then the light red circle again highlights that transmission line zone that we talked about earlier. Next slide. So tonight is a public hearing, and we did receive one email prior to completion of the packet, and that email was included in your packet. The concerns of the resident are entered into the public hearing as if they were spoken or read by them. And their concern is really about traffic on County Road 30 and additional traffic that would be generated by this site. And in your packet, we did include a memo from Public Safety responding to the concerns and noting that Hennepin County is adding turn lanes for the specific development, which will help manage traffic at this intersection with Bluff Lane. I think I got the name wrong.
High Bluff.
High Bluff, thank you, Mike. And so that testimony is the one public comment that's already in the record. So Mr. Chair, with that, I would ask that the commission open the public hearing and take any other public testimony, and then close the public hearing. And we do recommend approval of the preliminary plat subject to the findings and conditions in the draft resolution.
All right, very good. Thank you, Kendra. Very well done. Okay, at this point, we will open the public hearing, and we'll give Brad time to take it, Brad and Mike to take in time for the calls.
Correct. So right now, if anyone wants to speak, they can dial *9 on their phone. That'll essentially raise your hand for Mike to see. And it looks like we only have one person on the call who's not staff or commission. I'll ask one more time. If you want to speak now, please dial *9. Mike, anything on your end?
Nothing here.
Okay, so we have no one here to speak at the public hearing.
Okay, the chair will entertain a motion then to close the public hearing.
So moved, Commissioner Berenkamp.
Second, Commissioner Schulak.
Okay, we'll take roll call. Chair Jacobs, A. Commissioner Dickman,
Yay, Commissioner Dickman.
Commissioner Berenkamp,
Yay, Commissioner Berenkamp.
Commissioner Schulak,
Yay, Commissioner Schulak.
Commissioner Wu.
Yes.
Okay, the public hearing is now closed. Okay, so commission comments and questions. If I may so suggest, to keep things as organized, I hope you all know that I do my very, very, very best to make sure that everybody gets all the time that they need to ask questions and make comments. And so I hope that nothing in this process is viewed to deny or limit each of your ability. And as many times as we need to keep going through this, I'll be glad to do so. But in talking with Brad, I thought maybe the easiest thing would do is if I start out, I've already written down my questions. I'll ask those. And then we'll just go right down through the line through Commissioners Dickman, Schulak, Berenkamp, and Wu. And I know that through those discussions, all of a sudden maybe we get, a new question to ask. But if we can all hold off, and then we'll run through that process again. And And hopefully we catch everything through 2 rounds. But if we need to continue further, more than willing to do so. So how's that sound? Everybody in agreement with that?
Sure.
Okay, good. All right, well, I'll start off then. So to Kendra, help refresh my memory, but I do believe this is our first OS&P subdivision, is it not?
It is our first one under the new ordinance. We have 2 that are built and 1 that's approved but not built, but this is the first one under the new ordinance.
Okay, and how long ago were those other ones?
The 2 that are built were approved pre-recession, 2004, 2005. They're the summer project down on Mohawk and Meadow Creek Estates over north of Tesmer Road. And
Okay, all right. So that precluded, well, you know, before all of us, I think, even me. So I just want to make sure that as we go through this, we kind of get this right, because I've kind of looked at this as we are going to be setting some precedents here. And if there's one thing I know that I've heard over the years is that, you know, we need to be consistent. And I think the OS&P, while I agree with everything, the objectives, obviously there are things that can be, you know, well, we've got this and we've got that, but it's not quite maybe what, you know, as Kendra was saying, we need to discuss that one main question about whether or not this is centered or not. So with that being said, my second question then is on page 2 of the staff report. The applicant wants a 200% subdivision rights, and indicates in here that they are proposing curb and gutters. Now, you again mentioned it in the presentation here, Kendra, but I found it interesting that not even in the applicant's narrative, nor could I directly demise from any of the other documents or reports in here, is you know, what is that still the plan? I mean, are they, and I would assume the urban street is curb and gutter and then bituminous, but there really wasn't much discussion about it. And I just want to make sure I'm clear about that's going to take place here. Because otherwise, without it, they get 150%, correct?
Correct. So the plans do show public streets with curb and gutter that do meet our city standards.
Okay, and that'll be a burden upon the city then for maintenance and upkeep, I presume?
Yes, once the streets are constructed, we do inspect them during the construction process. And once we accept the city streets after the warranty period, then they become city streets like every other city street in town, and the city would maintain that.
Okay, now, am I correct in assuming then that because they got curb and gutter, they will have a state or a street drainage system? And those drains are going to go to these so-called retention ponds or whatnot?
That is correct.
And all the calculations then for these water retention ponds are based upon, you know, we don't have such a collection system in my neighborhood, obviously, but I would assume that those are being addressed in all of the analytical materials from the county and from WANC and whatnot.
Yes, that's correct. That is one of the items where additional information will be required to ensure compliance, but there's notes to that effect in the engineer's memo and the resolution.
Okay. Very good, thank you. Third question, on page 4, then the parks and trails. Now, I took some particular interest in this part of it because, you know, this is not all that much dissimilar from what I do here on my own property. I bought that ag land. I built a trail that goes around, by a creek. It's got wetlands and everything else. And so I was curious about how, and I've got a couple questions related to it, but my first one was this issue about access. And I know that there has been a suggestion that it go east to the property line. And it looks like then at the east, where there's going to be that future road leading up to the hammerhead, you're suggesting that they get an easement that'll be heading south. I thought maybe the easiest thing then is from that northeast corner where this trail starts and ends. Wouldn't it be just simpler? I mean, I calculated it's like 570 some odd feet. Couldn't they just go right along the northern edge of that field and build their trail and then just head up north and run right into that hammerhead?
Yeah, yes, they certainly could. Yes.
Okay.
And it's really up to them. I mean, we don't, either way is fine. They just need to show us how they're going to be able to get access, because right now that ends at somebody's lot and there's no way to get to that trail.
But the suggestion that they move it in between lot 7 and 8, wouldn't that require then that lot 7 and 8 be adjusted to allow for a easement then?
Well, an easement, but it wouldn't necessarily change the lots. I certainly have no objection, though, if they want to make a longer trail connection and bring it into the street. That's absolutely, that's absolutely fine. I think I was just thinking that's the shortest path.
Okay, all right. Okay, so related to this wood chip trail, and again, I know that in the years that I've had my trail out here, and it goes through woods and everything just like this, there's a fair amount of maintenance that needs to go with this. Now, being that this is going to be owned by the developer or the owner, I don't know who that individual is, but how does the neighborhood get assurances that this will actually be maintained and usable? I mean, just picking up sticks from the trees is really seriously a lot of work. And mine's not even a quarter mile long. So what assurances does the neighborhood get that if this is going to be the centerpiece, if you will, if we allow this OS&P and say, well, yeah, it's not in the center of your development, it's at the end, but I think it's a great amenity. We use ours all the time. But given the amount of work and that this is owned by somebody else, what if they don't put down wood chips? Or what if they don't mow it? You know, and what if they don't pick up all the sticks and branches every year? What does the neighborhood, what are they going to do if the centerpiece of their open space neighborhood is, and we're talking 20 years that this has to be maintained? What options do they have if it's not?
Yeah, so the open space preservation plat conditions include a condition that homeowners association documents need to be prepared. And those documents need to specifically address the maintenance of the open space. That includes the initial restoration of those open space areas as native prairies and how they're going to be maintained in perpetuity. Honestly, the trail is less of a maintenance issue than those other open space issues with the prairie. But that needs to be part of it, is to say, is there an easement or some other agreement between the HOA, who owns the other 3 outlots, and this developer who owns outlot B? That is a critical part in my mind of this open space, is to have access to that trail. So that needs to come in with the HOA documents. And that's a condition in condition number 15, requiring those HOA documents, conservation easement documents, is where we would expect to see that. What's happening in the conservation easement areas and how is it being maintained and financed, frankly.
Okay. Now, again, going back to my experience, I've had neighbors and kids who think that that is all of a sudden some sort of open trail for motorized vehicles. And they've gotten everything they can think of stuck back there, from bobcats to golf cars to you name it. Will there be any restrictions on whether or not motorized vehicles from the neighborhood can use that trail?
Well, certainly the developer can and should include those types of things in the covenants and the HOA documents.
Okay.
The city also has regulations about motorized vehicle trails or go-kart trails, motorbike tracks, whatever we call them in the ordinance, I forget right now. But no, we would expect to see those kinds of things in the conservation easement documents. That they should talk about preservation, restoration, and management plans, as well as how those areas can be used.
Okay.
We'll be looking for that, and we'll be reviewing those with the city attorney.
Okay. Now, this outlot B, especially the wooded section, has a history of being hunted. Is this the similar type of thing? I mean, if it's a walking ground open to the neighborhood, I would assume it would be somewhat almost obvious then that you'd have to restrict any and all hunting in there.
Well, I mean, it's private land, so it's no different from 40 acres that any of you own. You have to give people the right to hunt on your land in the first place. And the city does have hunting restrictions about how close to, for firearms at least, how close to homes you can discharge a firearm. I'm not familiar with our hunting regulations, so we'd have to look at those, but certainly I'd expect the HOA documents to clearly say whether or not that's permitted.
Well,
I've got a question, but I'm wondering, am I speaking out of turn or can I ask it? And it's about this outlot B.
okay, I think Meredith, I'm just about done. So if you could just hold your question and it will just keep going in order. Okay.
Certainly.
You know, Kendra, I know that we're not here to set policy, but I think when it comes to these OS&Ps, if this is going to be an amenity to the neighborhood and there's people that could go through there at any time, I think the idea of allowing any sort of hunting, I don't care if it's public or privately owned, it is an amenity to that neighborhood, which we are granting double the rights for this development. I don't know why maybe our OS&P doesn't have that more specifically outlined as to what uses can and cannot be done. You know, because then what is to say then that somebody can't hunt in outlots, you know, A, C, and D? You know, if they're more than 600 feet from a home, then you got people out there hunting in these little narrow strips around the perimeter of the neighborhood. So I'll let it be though. I had one other question here, Kendra, about the theme. There really was no narrative about the theme of the architectural stuff. Does that come later after the preliminary's done and they start to come to us with more specifics about it? Or is this just going to be, well, yeah, we want it to be rural architecture, country architecture, but yet, you know, somebody goes and puts up, you know, some modern, you know, architectural design building that looks nothing like, you know, you would find anything else out here. Are we missing that portion at this stage of the game, or does that come later?
No, the developer is not proposing anything beyond what he said in his narrative.
Okay, does that come later?
No, I mean, you're not required. Those standards are not requirements that require a theme. They're encouraged. And this developer said he's not doing that, other than the language he used in the narrative, which said something like rural theme. So I would not expect anything else. It's my understanding the developer is platting these lots and selling them to individual homeowners.
All right, so basically it's worthless. The theme idea that somebody has to come out and give a description about the theme of the properties they're going to build, even though he said we're going to have it that, but without anything else, it's
So
it's kind of
let me correct myself. So we don't require a developer to have a theme, but we do require the developer to give us their HOA documents, which will have whatever standards they choose to incorporate. In this case, again, an architectural theme is desired, not required. And he has said very little about that. So I would expect not to see an architectural theme as part of the HOA covenants when we get those. So we will get covenants.
Okay, all right. Well, I see providing covenants to create an architectural theme to include items such as landscaping, porches, side or rear loaded and detached garages. A written narrative describing the architectural theme shall be provided with the preliminary plat. And all I see is rural. That's basically the whole narrative.
Right. So when we first, just to back up, in the old ordinance that existed in 2004, you were required as a developer to meet a certain number of these design guidelines. Those were removed when these were updated in 2011 and stayed removed in the 2019 updates. So what the code says is the residential lots should be designed to achieve as many of the following objectives as possible. And one of those objectives is number 6, providing covenants to create an architectural theme. So that's what makes it a little bit difficult, Mr. Chair, is that these are desired objectives, not requirements that we can check off.
Okay, all right. Now, my understanding is tell me if I'm wrong, but as I read through the objectives, and the objective was to preserve as much of the natural character as possible. Now, maybe it's worded differently, but in looking at their preliminary plat, there's a couple of lots where the house is appearing to be, and these would be okay, down on the south, just above the creek. And there's a row of trees that run through there. I know I had this stuff. It was lots
6 and 7.
Yeah, block 2. And they specifically put in there just as the proposed location of the home. So like lot 6, it's just on the north side of this little line of trees. Lot 7, it's going in between a little gap in the trees. And I looked at this. I went out there and looked at this. So my question is, are these trees going to be preserved, or will they be basically bulldozed under?
Let me pull up the tree preservation plan. I believe they will be removed, but I will have to switch to that page. So give me a minute.
guess maybe the overall question is I write down these notes and I can't remember where I wrote it or where I saw it, but is there not supposed to be a tree identification listing or inventory, and then a delineation of all the trees that will be removed? I mean, we've seen this on most every other, you know, the Lennar developments and everybody else. They came in and said, okay, here's our tree inventory, and these ones are going to be removed. And I don't recall seeing anything, and I would have thought that in an open space thing where we're talking about preserving, you know, open spaces and their natural identity or character, that a tree preservation, or at least what will be removed, would have been something on the more, you know, important sides. And did they, I mean, do we just not know what they're going to tear out of here and where, or isn't it necessary?
We do have a tree preservation plan, Mr. Chair. We get 40 or so pages of plans, and I'm sorry that I didn't include that. I do filter through which ones come in the packet.
Okay.
We never give you every plan sheet. That should have been in there, and I apologize for that. We do have a tree preservation plan. I'm happy to share it with the commission following this meeting. I can work with Brad or Mike to get that sent out.
Well, listen, it's not like a big stand of oaks, but I just kind of looked at it when I saw where they were proposing these houses. I thought, oh, well, good. They're going to try to preserve this, you know, this line of trees. And, you know, there's some benefit to it, not a lot, but if you take that all out, basically you're left with the only trees left on the entire site are down in Outlot D. Otherwise, there's really nothing else out there. In the whole development, there's not a single tree.
Well, I do think more than the trees in Outlot B are shown on the tree preservation plan, but you're right. The bulk of the trees that are being preserved are those in Outlot B in the south west corner of the site.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Last question, and I don't really want to get into this a whole lot. There's probably a pretty simple answer to this, but as I was out touring this thing and knowing the issues I've had with my creek, which is not a whole lot different than the creek that runs right through east and west on this thing. Mm-hmm. But right now I'm losing farmland and my trail ability to maintain it and to use it, because somewhere along the line, the water's not draining correctly, or there's too much of it. So my one question is, will this development increase, or how might it impact that creek that runs through, and the properties are either upstream or downstream from it? Has that been fully contemplated? Because I know that there's some issues along that waterway and things with drain tiles, and et cetera, et cetera.
Stormwater management is one of the most complicated and critical review items in any development.
Agreed.
And so we do have a stormwater management plan from them. The plan that we received, engineering has reviewed and provided a number of comments. We will need more information to be able to finalize that. One of the items I highlighted in my presentation is that when we look at that ditch, we think some stabilization is going to be required as part of this project as well. So not only managing the runoff in the ditch and in other areas of the site, but managing that ditch to make sure it doesn't erode as a result of the impacts of this development.
Okay, all right. That is all I have. Thank you very much, Kendra. I appreciate it. And so now we will move on to Commissioner Dickman. Questions, comments, discussion?
I had a few questions. First, just on the, and maybe this is just because of the difference with the classification, but was there anything specific around mailboxes, street lighting, anything with the lots where certain tree requirements, like we've had in other developments?
We do not have that urban street edge that we see in some of the developments where we have trees spacing along the street. They are showing streetlights, and we in fact included a condition in the engineer's memo that they work with the city engineer to determine the street light locations. Generally, we see them at street intersections. So we'll be working with them on the locations as well as the design of that. I would expect, for example, a industrial, the big gooseneck at the intersection with County Road 30, and maybe something more residential in nature within the project itself, but that has not been finalized. There would not be street trees, but each lot is required to plant one new tree. And again, remind me what your did you have a third part to that?
I think it was mailboxes.
Well, just because it's
no.
an HOA, if it was centralized mailbox or individual mailboxes per lot.
Right. We do not know what that will be, but I would expect it will be centralized mailbox locations. That is the post office's standard basically now.
Okay. My other question was on the Eastern Connect. Obviously, in the appendix, Hennepin County talked about this quite a bit. Is just thinking forward with that Eastern Connect and that through street, is Trailhaven the next outlet road that would be the long-term Eastern Connect for this development?
So with that street connection that's planned to go to the east, ultimately, east. There's an existing neighborhood there, so I think it's more of a connection to that. I'm looking for that street name. To that neighborhood rather than all the way out to Trailhaven.
Fox Valley.
Well, Kendra, let me jump in there. Fox Valley Drive, but I think the main connection
Valley.
is for there's a property in between this property and Fox Valley that needs access as well. So I think it's to serve the property in between Fox Valley and this property.
And who is responsible then for that connect? Is it when the property owner that has that access sells and then the city puts that through? Is it a developer responsibility? I'm just trying to get clarification of, we put the hammerhead in and then there's a connect between the two neighborhoods. Who's responsible for that?
So when the property if the property to that 40-acre property to the east were to develop, they would, in the rural areas, we generally say they are required to make that street connection. It's a little bit different in the urban areas. We require them to build the street to the property line, and the
Right.
developer next door does that. We talked about that for this in these rural subdivisions. It could be 40 years before they connect. So our recommendation is to build enough for the hammerhead so that we can plow and turn around, but not necessarily to bring it all the way to the property line. Simply because.
And do we do anything with that current landowner for communication and letting them know that right of way is there if they're not aware, or how does that communicated to them around kind of what that, all of a sudden a hammerhead shows up in your backyard? How is that communicated?
Well, through tonight's meeting, I mean, this public hearing notice is sent to adjacent landowners to notify them development is proposed. And we do also a development proposed sign. If you were out there, you probably saw that blue, I think it's blue sign, to kind of give people a heads up as well.
And then just two more questions. One, you mentioned in the preamble about still using that private piece. I think it's Outlot B for ag. how from an access standpoint, what does that ag access look like? Are there going to be combines driving through a urban street neighborhood, and would the road have to be fitted to sustain that type of equipment? Because I don't, it doesn't seem like through Bechtold you'd want to be cruising through a neighborhood, but I don't know if cruising through, coming off of Highway 30, I'm just wondering how that access point works from an ag perspective.
That's a question we have for the developer as well. We believe there's a farm access that crosses the ditch now over by lot 6, I think it is block 2. But that obviously won't be able to be continued. So one of our comments is that any ditch crossings need to be evaluated. It is not clear yet from them what their plans are for that. I mean, it's a fairly small piece of property to be farmed. So is it something that they will lease to an adjacent landowner and come from a different location outside of the development? I'm not sure, but we would like to know that so that we can ensure that access is provided first. And that, again, the HOA documents need to clearly talk about what's happening in that open space and how that access is provided.
And then 2 follow-ups. With that potentially still being used for ag, I'm assuming the owner would be responsible for any of the state laws around buffer between that drainage ditch or creek and the specific ag that they're farming, correct?
Right, this is not identified as one of the streams that are protected with that additional buffer requirement. But certainly that is something that we'll be looking at as we look at ditch stabilization and stormwater management.
Okay, so if it's not that, is there something then between the, if I look at lots, let's find the better one here, 7, 6, 7, 8, that would potentially be abutted right up to that ag parcel. Is there anything that we would require on the plat or within the ordinances that we have that provide a minimum amount of space between active farmland and property line?
We don't require anything by ordinance, but a couple things. The trees along that the south lot line of those lots are proposed to be preserved, so they will continue to provide some buffer on the south side of that ditch. But again, a homeowner who buys into this neighborhood will get the homeowner documents that will say parcel B will be farmed, and so certainly should be aware of the impact of those activities.
Okay. And then I know there was also mention from the county just specifically around well and septic and then some of the current lot sizing. We mentioned some things around the transformer or utility lines specifically for lots 3 and it looks like 13 where there doesn't look like a lot of maneuverability for home sites plus where the well and septics need to be. Have the developer proposed or any modifications, or is that part of the next step of potentially looking at some of that lot sizing to make sure that with the utility easement there on some of those lots that there's actually a place to put a house?
Yeah. No, we're concerned about that. We immediately, when we saw the plans, reached out to the developer to get a copy of the transmission line easements, and so we could see exactly what those restrictions were. And we do require that be included into the documents that are provided to homeowners so that they understand those restrictions. I think lot 3 is a very tough lot. It wouldn't be the one I would buy, but if people, as long as people are aware of the restrictions, I think that's certainly an option that the developer can use. And so the county did look at, just to clarify, one of the lots where they said changes needed to be made was lot 3, but it was a fairly minor change to the septic location.
Okay, those are my questions. Thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, Okay, we'll move on now to Commissioner Shulak.
Thank you. I think my biggest question looking at this was the amount of wetland, probable wetland, potential wetland. The amount of blue here, especially on this map under the letters SB19 and WR5, there's a very large amount of serious wetland. And if you overlay the plan for the neighborhood on top of that, it looks to me like 2 or 3 properties, 6 and 7, and possibly 8, will have wet basements. Or maybe I'm wrong, but is that all of these blue spaces on this map here, does that mean that the homeowners may have problems down the line with water in their basements?
The map that you're looking at is the Hennepin County map, and I always say that's a big fat marker, and it's a good guideline for where wetlands may be. The actual wetlands have been delineated and are shown on the plans, but it's Corcoran, so wet basements are very much a possibility. And one of the things I was trying to get at with my comment about getting final grading plans, that really is important, not just to make sure that there's room on the site for a house and a septic, but one of the things we look at is it a basement, a full basement, a walkout, a lookout, and start to look at that low floor elevation to make sure it is above is separated from the nearby wetlands. That is something that they will need to show us before we will approve a final plat.
Have we in other developments or other neighborhoods within the last few years or in Corcoran's history, have we encountered as much as what I think is potential wetland? And if so, do we give potential homeowners a heads up saying in the years ahead, you just may have water issues?
Have we had other projects that have had a lot of wetlands? Absolutely. I can think of a number of projects, including Fane Meadows, which was an OS&P that probably had more wetlands than this on it. But we do not specifically provide information to tell people they could have wet basements, but we do require surveys to be done. And so if you purchase a piece of property, you can see where the drainage and utility easements are, which may be hopefully something for people to sort of look at. And the reason we're asking for better plans from developers is so that we can raise early on red flags about elevations.
Mm-hmm. So we're trusting the developer to have the proper tests done, and
well, I think we're verifying it. So we make them give us the details about the wetland elevations or the stormwater pond elevations, and then we make them give us a grading plan with a house plan. Doesn't mean the homeowner has to build exactly that house, because this particular developer is not a builder that's going to build these lots. He's going to sell the lots to a different builder. But we need him to at least go through and say, this lot will only accommodate a walkout, for example. It won't accommodate a full, or it will not accommodate a walkout. It'll only accommodate a lookout or something to that effect. And that's where the additional grading detail is required. We do our best to protect people, but you know.
is there a way that
responsibility for the lots they buy too.
I'm sorry. Is there a way that a developer could play with those numbers a little bit? Is it an officially inspected document done by some sort of certified company, or is it something that they said, yeah, we're good down to about 8 feet or so, it should be no problem?
The plans from the developer are from a professional engineer who is licensed and signs the plans.
Okay,
And so they're at risk if they provide poor information. But they are then also reviewed by our engineers at the city, who are also professional engineers and have a professional responsibility to ensure that if they sign off on a plan, that it looks right.
okay.
You know, I feel like we have the best information possible at this point.
Okay,
If I may, and there's more redundancy at building permit application. We also review the survey that we actually see a house elevation, what they're proposing. So if they propose something different, that's another point where we check it, make sure they're above that level. So we're
Okay.
not going to have surface water entering the home.
okay. And I don't know what a saturated buffer is, but it looks like quite a few homes, especially if the southern part gets developed. A lot of that would have homes built in a saturated buffer. And I don't know if that's.
Do you mean the wetland buffer, the light green hashed part? Or
Yeah,
are you still on Hennepin County?
still here. This saturated buffer looks like it would incorporate quite a few homes. And I don't know if it's what a saturated buffer is, to be honest with you, but just had a question about that. Saturated.
To be honest, I haven't seen that phrase either. I'm gonna have to check with Kevin Matson and see what.
Saturated buffer to me sounds like a sponge filled with water, but.
Yeah.
And one last question on the, I believe it's, it starts out on the page that starts out, the open space will consist of 47.6 acres or 54% of the property in 4 outlots. Elsewhere in the documents, it lists 80 or 88 total acres. And so if you take the 47.6 acres in 4 outlots, that leaves about 33 acres, 32.9 acres would actually be in the development itself. And so that 32.9 acres would be divided by the 20 proposed lots. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm not checking your math in my head, but yes,
Okay.
that sounds right.
Okay, so not all of them are going to be 4.4 acres.
No, the smallest lot is, I think, 1.1 acres.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate your answers.
Okay, great. Okay, Commissioner Varenkamp.
Yeah, thank you,
You're up, sir.
Commissioner Jacob, or Chair Jacob, I should say. My biggest issue is I am the property owner that butts up to the very southwest corner of this property. And on the drainage and water resource map, it identified as a perennial stream running through my property. And that is drain tile. I'm doing everything I can to get that back underground because of the failed drain tile and such. I'm draining the property on the corner of Bass Lake Road and Bechtold, and I'm draining property even across the street from me, the Sherbert Dairy Farm. I drain much of that property through my drain tile, and then the property from the southwest corner of Bechtold and Bass Lake Road. All of that water is feeding through the back of my property or down the middle of the back of my property onto this property, and then into that Fox, I'm trying to remember that road.
Fox Valley?
Fox Line Drive.
the Fox Valley Road and such.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm extremely nervous of all of the water that is going through my property from the south and the west into this property and such. We keep calling this a ditch, which I kind of understand, but it is always running. There's always water running through this thing. And I'm just nervous about it being forgotten, so to speak. And I think we've got a lot of things that are in place as far as the city to make sure that it stays to the forefront. I'm worried about the people down on the end of Fox Valley. I'm surprised that none of them have called tonight. But when the water is running strong through this drainage area and such into their properties, I know we've done a lot of work to improve their ditches and stuff, but there's still high water times, especially in the early spring. What are we doing, and what would this developer do to help mitigate any of that runoff? All I'm seeing in the drawings are two mitigation ponds, I'm going to call them. One on lot 6, and then one to the south of essentially the Hammerhead turnaround is all I see, and then the rest are wetlands. Like I said, I live out here, and there's truly one wetland, and that is on the finger of a property that goes up the Beckhold Road, and then these other wetland areas identified, I assume by Hennepin County, they're plowed and planted right now. So I'm not sure how they're identifying them as wetlands. So that's one concern. Again, my biggest concern is the drainage from the southwest to the northeast central part of this property. Again, it kind of begins beyond me to the southwest, but I'm draining a significant amount of property. I've worked with Hennepin County. I've gotten 2 calls. They're telling me they're going to give me plans. If I follow those plans and repair my drain tile, everything should be fine. I am not getting answers back from them or calls back from them. So I'm wondering if we, the city, could help me get information so I can complete the drain tile repair and kind of reclaim my southeast corner of my property. Anything to the east of this drainage area, I can't get across anymore. Kind of like Chair Jacob is talking about his farmland, and he can't get to some of his property. A question about the farming, and I think you answered it, Kendra. I'm concerned about the property on Outlot B in the very northeast corner. It's kind of landlocked from the creek, and then obviously the backyards of those lots. Wondering what's happening or how that's going to get done, or if it's just going to be planted in prairie grass and maintained that way. The whole tree bark trail that's being talked about and shown, the delineation, the areas and such, is that something that would end up being a public deal or only private to this property? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think the trail is intended to be a private trail just for the homeowners association. And in terms of the plantings, the developer has sort of postponed that. They won't get final plat approval till they give us the information.
Okay.
So exactly sure. They've just said, native plantings, but we'll work to make sure that those are acceptable to the city.
If there's anything you could do, anything you could do to help me finalize my repairs to this drain tile. I want to get this fixed and try and get this water running underground or through the dirt to be somewhat filtered, and then drain tile, and then it breaks out into this creek or ditch across this Paulson property. I'm a little concerned about, I think it's lot 15 and lot 17. they show that the mound system for septic are going to essentially be in the front yards of those two properties. Is that correct?
Yeah, 17, either the primary or the secondary is in the front yard, but yes, for 15,
Right.
both are.
So is that something appealing to someone that would buy this, or is there a way that could be flip-flopped? That's just a recommendation. And then as Chair Jacobs talked about those strips or those lines of trees and where the houses are, that whole line of trees is a significant elevation above the creek bed. I'm guessing there's a 15 to 18 foot elevation change from those trees down to that water or the creek bed or the ditch. And I'm curious how much dirt moving, earth moving and stuff is going to change that elevations. I'm assuming those are going to be some of the prime properties on this property. As far as it's a beautiful view from, it would be a beautiful view from those back of those houses, those decks and stuff, to overlook this open space, the woodland, and then that the remainder of Outlot B, which is going to be farmland. So I'm glad you are emphasizing that it is not going to be a cul-de-sac at Outlot B. That's going to be planned in the future to be a through street all the way to Bass Lake Road. I can't emphasize enough, if we can identify that hammerhead at the end of that street before we get into Outlot B, that is going to continue through, and it is going to be an access to the property to the east. I know I've been part of a lot of areas where a lot of the neighbors do everything they can to say they were not told it was going to be through streets. They expected it to be a cul-de-sac. Many of the areas, there are many of the previous plans from another city. They went through and finished the streets, but there's some that really made it dysfunctional by turning it into a cul-de-sac because of the requests of the neighborhoods and the petitions and those kind of things. So great job on both those two deals. Like I said, or like I believe, this is a beautiful piece of property from those line of trees midway through to the south, to the north, and to the west. It's a big piece of farmland, and it would really be nice to see a lot more than one tree per parcel being planted. As noted in the staff report, significant concern about the junction on the County Road 30. I know we're adding east and west turn lanes and such, but a big concern is the rise from the Paulson driveway. It rises and then it falls down to High Bluff Lane or whatever that road is to the north. I've seen and witnessed a number of times where people have blown by the stop bus there and those kind of things. And I know it's noted in the staff report, but it really needs to be a focus. I'd hate to see a bus get hit by any vehicle at any time, but I don't have a solution to that other than maybe turning it into a lighted intersection, but I know that's not practical at all. So those are my concerns. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Dean. All right, and next up, Commissioner Wu, floor is yours.
Okay. I'm trying to look at the.
Just a second, Commissioner Wu, just a second. The connection's really slow. Could you maybe turn off your video while you're talking? That might speed up the connection so your sound comes through better.
that any better?
It's a little better.
Okay, or I could just go by phone if that's better, but well, let me know if you're not able to hear clearly. I'm looking at the first requirement of the OS&P where it talks about the central, arrange lots around a central focal point. And it says should be, lots within an OS&P plat should be designed to include the following. Is that meant to be will be designed to include the following, or should try to include the following?
Yes, Commissioner, that's should try to. That, as I mentioned before, earlier versions of this ordinance had a requirement to meet a certain number of those objectives, and over time the council has removed that and simply said you should try to do these things.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I think with the shape of this development and the Serpentine Road, it would be very hard to a central circular type of with a central focus. It doesn't seem that this kind of layout, this way is organized. So I just wanted a clarification on that. I think there's enough wetlands dotted in and around each of these houses kind of get a view of something like that. But my question too is about outlot B. My understanding is that that wooded area that on outlot B is not, doesn't have a permanent conservation easement because it's not viewed as it's not flagged as a high quality amenity in our comprehensive plan. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So when outlot B develops, perhaps as the ghost plan shows, does that trail just go away then? They no longer have to provide a trail?
I think that's part of what we want to see in their long-term plan for the open space. But I think it would go away. I don't know that there's a way that you could preserve that trail the way the ghost plat at least is laid out. But at that point, if it's urban development, we would likely see a sidewalk on that new portion of street.
So that's permissible then, that because at the time that covenant, that conservation easement, the non-permanent conservation easement, which currently protects outlot B, at the time when urban development comes into this area, it would no longer be an OS&P, so they wouldn't have to provide that trail. Is that the understanding?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Okay. It just seems a little strange then that to me, that they've designated the amenity for the development onto an area that's actually not going to provide it for all the time. It's going to be developed at some point. It seems like if you were going to provide, and please correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding of the OS&P, but if you're going to provide an amenity to the residents of the OS&P, it should be on one of the outlots that is protected, that it cannot be built upon. Whereas they've actually put it on an outlot that is going to be built upon, and it's just going to go away. And that seems a little odd to me. That seems to fly against the principles of the OS&P.
I think that's a fair comment, but again, we're in a little bit of a disadvantage because they're objectives, not requirements. But certainly that's something that you could recommend to the council. I mean, the HOA will continue to maintain the perimeter, what I call the perimeter outlots of A, C, and D.
Well, I mean, D is an outlot no matter what happens on this land because of it being a utility easement. So in the narrative, they cite that as though it's something that they're providing, but that's actually not true. It's something that exists regardless of how the land is being developed. So I kind of discount that point in their narrative that that's kind of a give me. It really isn't. I'm also looking at the east boundary where there's the high quality bass forest there. And I'm looking at the lines. I'm looking at page 1 of 22. It's pretty much the site plan that you gave us. And it shows these lot lines. And it looks like they're pretty much, in the ghost plat, they're pretty much making this bass forest visible only to those private lots backing up to it. Is that a correct reading of the site plan?
If Outlot B were to develop in the future, yes, they have lots backing up to their east lot line, which backs up to that forested area. That's correct.
It seems like a really missed opportunity there. I mean, the OS&P seems to be in the way, and I read the zoning ordinance and looked at how it was written because they're unfamiliar to me. And then I look at the narrative that they wrote, that the developer wrote, and then I look at the commentary that you wrote up for this on behalf of the city, and it looks like these bass forests should actually be part. This is one of the natural amenities that this OS&P actually speaks to in terms of its principles, and yet we're relegating it to the backyard of a very few people who can afford the lot. So I feel like the planning here. No, go ahead, Kendra.
I was just going to say the OS&P lot. In fact, I would say all of these 20 lots have access to that because Outlot B is being preserved. The ghost plat is a post 2040, and the world will be much different when that develops. So for the at least the next 20 years, probably longer, these 20 homes have visibility to that through their outlot. Now the trail that they have access to is on the west side of the outlot, and those trees are on the property to the east, but they certainly still have a view over the ag land. So I feel like the OS&P plat that we're talking about now, which does not approve a ghost plat, it simply requires that they give some thought to it, doesn't have lots that back up to that and block it from everyone else. In fact, it keeps it open as part of the view shed for all of those homeowners.
So just so I'm clear in understood, I get what you just said, but just so I understand this, we're looking, correct, we're not critiquing the ghost plat. That's just a possible way that it could be developed in the future. But at the time that Outlot B does develop, this is no longer held to the requirements of an OS&P. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay,
because
so those
open space that was preserved is preserved only until such time as municipal sewer and water are available.
And then at that time, it just becomes subject to the subdivision standards at that time that it's developed. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. I think that I just need a clarification on the OS&P. The other questions I had have been answered in previous discussion. I would just further state that when we're doing an OS&P, it would be good to see the true preservation plans. I think that would be important just because it's so much about the character of the land, but you'd already discussed that. I don't think I have any other questions.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Meredith. All right, well, as we discussed, we'll go through this lineup one more time. I know I've got just a few quick questions, and some of you may as well. So let's give it a whirl. So we seem to be having a lot of discussion here about these outlots, and there were some questions I had, so I'll try to be as specific as I can. Outlots A, C, and D. Now, Kendra, to me, I kind of understand the idea that, you know, we want to have a border around the neighborhood, but I don't know. I'm just going to speak what I think I'm seeing here. Because 50% of the lots have to abut an open space, right?
Correct. Well, again, that's a desired objective.
Okay, desired objective. So it looks to me like maybe what took place here is that with the, especially A and C, and then maybe the non-power line D, is that we basically expanded utility easements around this thing and made those outlots and qualify those then as open space. It is what it is, but because their homes are 3 times farther than what the outlot itself is in most cases, I don't see that as really maybe meeting kind of the hopes of what we were, maybe especially when you look at generally put around a central amenity of the outlot or a conservation area, but neither here nor there. My question is this. These 3 outlots are going to be owned by the homeowners association. And as such, do those not then really become common area?
Yes, they do.
Okay. So on page 3, number 9, it says then that these areas must be landscaped with native vegetation with high wildlife conservation value. Now, you did make a comment earlier that these were going to be put into native prairie. My experience from my days back in Eden Prairie, when people were trying to convert farmland into native prairie, it's quite a process and it has to be certified, but they got tax exemptions if they did it right. Now, I'm not worried about that. But nowhere in here did I see what their plan is then for providing those areas, outlots A, C, and D with native vegetational growth beneficial to wildlife preservation. Is that going to be part of this, or what do we do to, I mean,
Yep.
I'm reading it, this is a requirement,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not seeing it in the plan.
Yeah, so one of the challenges is the developer says, trust me, we'll provide it later. So we attach conditions that say that's fine, but don't get upset when it takes a while to get to your final plat, because we've not seen that yet. And that's a very big deal. Not only what is it, but how are you maintaining it? How are you ensuring that that maintenance is funded?
Yeah.
Because it
Well,
is not
again,
inexpensive.
Yeah, I mean, we're giving them more development rights. Listen, my neighborhood isn't OS&P, but if this had been around, and maybe it was, but we're given a benefit, but in exchange, we're expecting that these natural areas are going to be done the way OS&P says. So I want to just verify that. Now, the question subsequent to that then is, are these outlets then, can any one of these residents take a walk through the outlet, you know, any outlet A or C or D? Or is it really just, well, you can't ride on it, you can't walk through it, you can't, they just there for wildlife? And I'm going to bet you're going to say that's part of the HOA document, that they got to kind of delineate how is it going to be used, who can use it for what and when, and et cetera.
That's
Okay.
right.
Okay, now.
I wish I could tell you, I wish we had that information, because it really is important to get a sense for what the project is. Unfortunately, they've chosen to defer that to a condition that they have to meet before final plat.
Okay, now this is then maybe more of a technical thing. So outlot D, underneath the power line. Somewhere I read that the power company dictates what kind of vegetational growth goes underneath the power line. If they're going to turn these into, I'm just going to use the term native prairie, I can't imagine that the power company would balk at it, but certainly you can't plant any trees under there or anything like that. And I would assume then that through this process, they'll have to get approval of what they can plant underneath the power line.
100%. I mean, I think we have the easement from the power line. They did provide that to us. It doesn't say much. My limited experience with this power company and this particular power line is related to the work that happened when Joe Basinski built their offices 15 years ago. It was a long time ago. And they were very restrictive about what could happen. They needed permits just to run a grader to do some grading in the area from the power company. So I think it's important to be clear that we have power company approval to do, if it is native plantings, to be able to do the maintenance that's required, which is sometimes a burn. Often these days we're doing it through mowing, not so much burning, but just making sure that those things can occur is really important. So there's a lot of heavy lifting to be done between now and the final plat to make sure that these areas are protected, restored, preserved, and maintained, and that financing is in place through the HOA to do that and answer questions like you're asking. As a homeowner, I would want to know, if I'm backing up to this, will people be creating their own footpaths through here because there's not a formal path planned, but will people be walking their dogs? I would guess.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then related to that, in outlaws A, C, and D, if they are put back to a native prairie, would those areas then qualify as a percentage for their upland area? I would assume so, but.
Yes, as long as it's not wetland, it would be counted towards the, or stormwater pond would be counted towards the upland area, yes.
Okay, last question, because I kind of laughed at this and it makes me think a little bit more about a couple of conditions on my own property. But when you look at an aerial view of this thing and you see these wetland designations, I kind of got to laugh because they're clearly plowing them. But yet on here, on this map, they're designated as wetlands, and in their plat, they're going to make these things retention ponds. Would those, are they going to basically just take these areas because they're obviously low, dig down and make them more of a wetland, hence retention pond? Because as they are right now, it'd be hard to imagine these things containing any water over and above maybe a couple of feet of what's there right now. I'm trying to understand how are these being designated as wetlands when clearly they're being plowed.
So I think you're looking again at the Hennepin County wetland map, or
Yes.
are you? Okay.
Well, no, this one here is Wink.
Yeah. So
it says Wink anyway.
Yep. So it helps me to know which map you're looking at. So thank you.
Okay.
For that.
I apologize.
Yeah, that's helpful. So yeah, farmers have different abilities to impact wetlands than other land users, first of all. But not all of those areas shown, like, I'm still not sure, and I'm gonna get the answer to Jim's question about what's a saturated buffer, because I've never heard that term before.
Okay.
So I'm gonna figure that one out before we meet again. Some of those wetland areas are, as you said, wet soils that don't necessarily qualify as wetlands under the Wetland Conservation Act. But even if they do, again, there are, and I'm not familiar with the details, but there are exemptions for active agricultural.
Okay. All right. That's all I had. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to Commissioner Dickman. Any additional questions or comments?
None from me.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Shulak.
Unmute.
Sorry, Judy would like that button.
All wives like that Zoom button.
No additional questions or comments, Mr. Chair.
All right, very good, thank you. Commissioner Varenkamp.
Thank you, Chair Jacobs. I do have one question I just saw. The cul-de-sac that is going kind of towards Outlot C or towards Bechtold Road, there's lines and such going onto the Paulson property. Will that change its traits if the Paulson property ever develops and such? Is that going to be another access for Paulson, or is that just lined in that way for a reason?
Yeah, great question. So the Paulson property to the north west does not have any development rights remaining, but the street right-of-way at that cul-de-sac does stub to the property line and does have the potential in the future, if sewer and water is available and the property could develop, to loop through.
Okay, all right. Thank you. That's all I had. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Wu.
There's a comment about the trail cross the link access through like, does that need to be mentioned in the resolution, or does that just come under the kind of the comments for approval that they need to incorporate into their plans?
You certainly can. I think that it's covered in the engineer's memo where they talk about ditch crossings, but to be fair, that certainly could be added as a separate condition in the resolution.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure. Since you mentioned it in your narrative, and they're supposed to be public access, but you know, if you think that the engineering memo covers it, then that's fine. I just wasn't sure. The only other question I had was on page 4 of the staff letter. At the bottom of the page, it talks about area for future right-of-way. In the southeast of the developable area of the plan, there will be an area for future right-of-way. Can you? It's a condition of approval. What is that area for future right-of-way? Southeast area of the, let's see. Southeast of the. Sorry, go ahead, Kendra.
Oh, sorry. That's that short stub street where we said we want them to do a hammerhead and it'll extend to the 40 acres to the east. We want that platted as right-of-way. They're not showing it as right-of-way today.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I don't have any other questions, thanks.
And just to be clear, I mean, I think the commission absolutely, as always, should amend the resolution if there are things that you want to call out, and that trail connection certainly could be one of them.
Okay.
Okay. Well, last call for any questions or comments.
I did have one question, and this might be for Kendra and Brad. I know it's 2040. Is it 2040 or if sewer and water is developed by the city, or is 2040 the lockout date no matter what?
The open space can only be developed and the conservation easement lifted if municipal sewer and water are available to serve the site. So 2040, I
Okay.
only use that date because this comp plan goes through 2040 and we do not have plans to serve it with sewer and water prior to that date.
But Commissioner Dickman makes a great comment that so assuming then that the 2060 plan comes on out, they'd have to keep this thing for another 20 years after that point. Of course, if all of a sudden we go into a massive boom, they can always erase the MUSA line and keep extending it faster out. I mean, I've seen that happen. So let's just say that they get to there in 2045. They'd have to keep it as an outlot until 2045, when sewer and water then gets proposed for development of that site.
Yes.
Okay. Good question.
So my follow-up then is it's related to the MUSA line, not necessarily anything the city is doing with our own water or sewer exploration.
Well, if we were going to provide sewer and water as a city in the metro area, it would be in the MUSA. So we would adjust the MUSA if we decided we had a way to serve this property with municipal sewer and water. But
to be clear though, in 2041, even though sewer and water isn't anywhere in the vicinity, he can't end the OS&P designation and then not worry about the path, and he can go lumber it all out and do whatever he wants. It has to be there in perpetuity until sewer and water arrives at the doorstep.
Correct. And this is where the attorney for the city and the attorney for the developer come into play, because we need to make sure that these covenants, I mean, without having the covenants, I think if they had prepared the covenants, 90% of the questions asked tonight would have been answered, right? So what that needs to do is be very clear and legally binding about protecting this land until the sewer and water is available.
Okay.
So a
Well,
follow-up to
Kendra-
that, Kendra, does that also mean that if the party that has this parcel decides to sell it to another party, the same classification of the property stays the same? It doesn't transfer or change if the rights of ownership change. Is that correct?
Correct. And that's the language that we
Okay.
pay the attorney to make sure is in there.
Okay.
Well, so Kendra, is there in the future, so I think you're right. It seems maybe we've kind of stumbled through this whole thing without the covenants or, some kind of, more language about what this thing is going to do. Is this something maybe we need to address as part of the OS&P development process, so that somebody doesn't just tell us, well, you're just going to have to guess a lot, and we're not going to get specific until we get all the final votes?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chair, the council could provide, because they'll probably have some of the same concerns. I think the council can provide more direction to staff from a policy perspective. Our position at the city of Corcoran, based on direction from the council, has always been get it complete and get it through the process and use the conditions so that we're not delaying things at this preliminary stage. But I think you guys have raised terrific questions tonight. It would have been nice to see those, and it certainly could be moving forward a requirement that we do simply not move it forward and deem it incomplete until we get those documents.
Okay. All right. Any other final comments or questions?
No.
Okay. So let's move on to the resolution. Now, I was thinking that there might be a couple things that we need to add, but they were cleared up through a professional staff presentation and answers. So I don't see any changes that I would recommend to it. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to add or change as a recommendation to the City Council?
Yeah, I think that we should add language about the trail connection. Since the OS&P language in the zoning ordinance talks about public access, right now it terminates at the end of private lines.
Okay, Meredith, I think that's great, but tell me, Kendra, I think that that's already part of the requirements, right? They have to come up with a plan to show you where public access is going to be granted to that trail, right? I mean, that's kind of already a requirement.
It is. I think it's in 15B, but I have no objection to adding a new condition, 15C, that says the trail shown in Outlot B must be revised to provide a connection to the planned public street, or something to that effect. I think that's where Meredith is going with it, right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, but now are we getting specific to bring that connection all the way over to the east up through the Hammerhead? Or is that still going to allow them the ability to bring it up through lot 7 and 8?
I was suggesting the language, the trail connection in Outlot B should be revised to connect the trail to a new public street, because that gives them either option. It gives them, it doesn't tell them how to do it. It just says, get it to one of those streets.
Okay, and that would go under 15, did you say D or E?
I thought it could be a new C.
A new C, okay.
Or excuse me, I'm sorry, a new D, because it goes right after that part talking about the open space easements.
Yeah.
You did say 15D, right?
I did, and then D would become E.
Oh, okay, all right. So we're going to create a new one.
Right.
Okay, and that is the, all right, I will assume staff will provide all the nice, concise language for this amendment.
I could read it and see if it meets the direction, and then you could move to include it in the resolution. I was suggesting the following language as item 15D and renumbering after that. The trail connection proposed in Outlot B should be revised to connect the trail to the new public street. Does that make sense?
Sounds good to
Perfect.
me.
Everybody else agree?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, any other changes? Okay, I got to get my script, Brad's script. I want to make sure I don't goof this up. Thank you, Brad, by the way. Okay, so we will entertain a motion to recommend approval of the resolution approving an open space and preservation plat for Paulson Farms for DS Management Group as presented and amended. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution.
Okay, Wu made the motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second, Mayor Kemp.
Okay. All right, I will take the roll call vote. Chair Jacobs votes yay. Chairman Dickman?
Commissioner Dickman votes nay. Lack of details specifically around outlot usage, no theme or focal point, which was brought up. It feels like a play me and I'll show you versus show me and I'll play you, to use a sports analogy there. I think also voting nay sends a message to the council that there's a lot of details that need to be worked through this in a procedure and a process that we have here that we're giving a lot. So Commissioner Dickman.
Very good, thank you. Commissioner Shulak.
Commissioner Shulak, yay.
Commissioner Verkamp.
Yay from Commissioner Verenkamp, but I duly note Commissioner Dickman's nay. I like the way he's thinking and looking, so definite take notice on Commissioner Dickman's nay.
Very good, thank you. Commissioner Wu.
Yes.
Okay, the recommended approval then passes 4-1. Thank you, everybody, and hopefully everybody got out what they needed, and I think it went very well for our first public hearing without being in front of the public. Okay. Moving on, we'll go to item 7, planning project update. Any comments or questions from anybody? I guess I will just make one general comment. As I talked with Brad the other day, we were testing out technology on my end for this, and Mr. Martins has said that we can expect a busy summer, and you know, we don't know when this isolation distancing hearing process is, how long this is going to be, but we're going to have some pretty big projects coming up through June and July, and so I'm hoping for the best, that we'll get through and give fair consideration to everything, and the feedback that is so necessary as part of this process to the not only to staff and the professionals there, but then also to the city council. So with that, I'll leave it open to anybody who has comments or questions on the planning update. I did talk with Brad a little bit. One of the things that sounded of interest and whatnot is this Eagle Brook Church. Eagle Brook Church has submitted a concept plan for a new church. And Brad, I think he mentioned it was going to be like 500,000 square feet in size or something. It's going to be like a campus.
Just to be clear, it's about like 70,000 square feet. So,
how much?
about 70,000 square feet.
70,000.
Yeah. So.
Oh, sorry, Brad.
I missed that.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that one. Well, I was thinking, you know, if we're talking 5,000 parishioners a Sunday morning, that's that could be a traffic nightmare for that particular quadrant. But okay. Tell Brad, does that involve a school then as well on that site?
No, it does not. There's a concept plan report. I think you could go to, Kendra, was that on the April 24th-ish meeting, 23rd-ish? So if you want to look at that, that probably gives you the best detail.
Is this on the land that is owned by the gentleman on Hackamore Road with the, he's got the drainage issues on his pool right along? Doesn't he own all that land down there in that corner, or some of it?
Some of it.
Okay. I know that he's always talked about the development of that particular quadrant of the intersection, and I hopefully this is something that will hopefully certainly meet his approval. I don't know what the situation is, but a church is always a good thing, I guess. All right, anybody else?
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Another place to vote, Brad.
I have a question about number 6. What is Corcoran Crossroads asking for to change the frontage or the roof or something?
Yes, Commissioner, they want to expand the gas canopy to add more pump islands and then modify their signage. So they're trying to get a complete application together. It looks like they were hoping to do an administrative approval, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to need some variances to likely see that application.
Thank you.
Kendra, I have a question about the Sawgrass development. When that came through, when it was first proposed by that Peachtree company, and then they didn't buy the land, I was under the understanding that the current it had to be developed pretty much to the letter as was previously approved, or they had to start over, going through the development again. But now it sounds like it has to be substantially similar to what was previously approved. Has that changed?
I think that's always been true. If you think about Ravinia as an example, things change over time. And so you may add a few lots or something. And so I think it was enough of a question, though, that we wanted to raise it with the council to say, do you believe that these changes are generally consistent with the approved preliminary plat, so that are you comfortable moving ahead with just the final plans? It was enough of a question for us that we brought it to the council, and they said generally yes, it's generally consistent, and we would accept a final plat and plan with PUD amendments.
So is the Planning Commission going to see what MI Homes is proposing now, given that it's generally consistent but not the same?
Well, you always see the PUD final plan for any project. And so yes, if they move forward, that PUD final plan would come to the Planning Commission.
Okay, all right. Because I think the last I had heard when I'd been on the plan, I'd done city council liaison, was that there were more townhomes as part of this revised plan by MI Homes. But that's all I've heard about.
Yeah. I mean, I think they went to the council, and that was February.
It was on the April 23rd as well, but it was pulled by the applicant. So the packet still exists where you can review the materials, but the applicant actually has to pull it, so it wasn't discussed by the council.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Well, I notice with that property, I see that the chainsaws and the bulldozers got there before the development process once again.
Right.
All the trees that were there are no longer.
Ripped out. Mm-hmm.
Yep, they leveled everything. So. All right. Any other questions or comments on the planning update? Okay, not hearing any. Let's move on to the city council report. Council liaison Schultz. Is he on with us?
Yes, can you hear me, Mr. Chair?
I can at that. There he is.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, fellow commissioners. It has been a long time since we've last talked. March 5th to be exact. So there's a laundry list of things. I want to just highlight the ones that pertain more to the Planning Commission's probably interest. Back in March, we did authorize and award a low bid contingent on permit approval for a test well to move forward. So we're continuing to look at developing our own water system, and that's one of the starts of potential assessment of that. We did authorize the recruitment process of a city planner, although my understanding is that's probably a little bit on hold right now due to the current conditions of the pandemic and job market out there.
Now, I heard Kendra Lindahl is in the lead for that position. Or did
Always.
I hear, you know, I don't know where I heard it. No,
Can't afford her.
I don't know. It would sure be nice, though. I would assume, let me ask this question along that line, though. So hiring a planner, though, is still going to require some support, and I would assume from Kendra's group.
Yeah, it would.
To some degree. I can't imagine that one person can do all the work I know that they can do.
You probably want to think of it more like how we work with Wank and Kevin Matson.
Okay.
It would be similar to that in fashion.
Okay.
Let's see. The next thing we talked about, we had a closed session at that same meeting about acquisition of land for water main improvements. That's the looping of water down 116 towards Ravinia. And jumping, there wasn't much on the March 20th meeting. That would probably be of interest to this group. March 26th meeting, we had the 4th edition of Bellwether that you guys saw in early March. That passed on your recommendations. April 13th, there's the Appaloosa Woods neighborhood. We authorized a feasibility study, letter of benefit for potential paving project. Maple Grove is going to be updating their infrastructure in that area, so it looks like a good opportunity to probably consider paving that portion of Corcoran streets that are still gravel there. That's not a vote to move forward. It's just a feasibility study to see what, and then we can find out what the cost of that would be. The 23rd meeting, there was a sketch plan for Eagle Brook that you mentioned, 70,000 square foot church. I believe it was talking, the facility could hold 1,700 parishioners at a time. I think it was something like that. And car parking for 850 or something like that, if I remember right. Another thing that came in, we had a presentation of Three Rivers Park District on the Diamond Lake Regional Trail Corridor that they're looking at doing in the future. That's a north-south corridor that would run from Rogers down through Wayzata. And they had 2 to 3 different north-south route plans that they wanted high-level comment from City Council on. We provided feedback with regards to those. That was very well presented. Another thing, what was I going to think about? Oh, the Northwest Metro Regional Surface Water Supply Study. That's a study with regards to cost-benefit analysis on all cities just doing their own wells versus like a regional water treatment facility versus pulling water out of the Mississippi River in a joint project. So we're going to stay closely into that study as well and see how it would benefit our city going forward. I believe the the one that rose out of that whole study was a centralized water treatment facility pulling water from the Mississippi River, supplemented by city-owned wells for peak, if memory recalls. And Brad, step in and correct me if I'm wrong on any of these. Ordinance amendment on mandatory utility connection. I believe the date listed in the packet is wrong. That I believe it went to August 31st, 2021. We extended to, not 2020. That's to help our local businesses that are suffering right now from the COVID-19 economic impact. Then we also provided a letter of support for Hennepin County and the County Road 19 117 Spot Mobility Safety Project. They're looking for updating that intersection. The city shows support, but not financial support would be a good way to put that. And that pretty much sums up the items that pertain to Planning Commission. If you have anything else, I'd be happy to answer, or if I can shed any more light on any of those others, let me know.
One question. So the cropland rental,
Uh-huh.
what did the city get per acre for that?
Brad, you probably know that number off.
I think it's 141 an acre, which is down quite a bit from last year.
$141 an acre. Now, this is the land that is right next to City Hall, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I suspect that they'll at least get that full year because of whatever, independent of what the because we've sold part of that land, correct?
Yeah, there was, Brad can probably, he can probably articulate a lot better than I can, but St. Therese, there was a funding date that got pushed back by the state of Minnesota. And so it didn't look like it was going to be developed as quickly as we thought it was going to be. So instead of just sitting on that land and the city having to maintain weed control for that land, we decided to rent it out based on rental prices that we already had agreed to on other parcels of land. So the farmer is going to plant the land. If for some reason funding comes in and the project moves forward faster than what we suspected, there'll be a payback to the farmer for lost expenses there. But it was something we did so we didn't have to maintain the land in its current state.
Yeah. Well, 141 is, if I'm not mistaken, I think the last lease that was signed a couple of years ago, I think that was like at $200 an acre. So, okay. All right. Well, great. Well, thank you very much, Councilor. Is there any questions or comments for Councilor Schultz? Okay, well, not hearing any. Let us move on. Council update. All right, let's move on to, I guess the last one is other business. Is there any other business that we need to discuss?
Brad, do we have an agenda item about attendance at council meetings, liaison roles?
Yeah, it's a next item after other business, but essentially what the plan is to invite the labeled commissioner to be part of the video meeting for the council meetings. And if you aren't able to, that's just fine. But I think our goal is to invite you to attend via Zoom if it's your shift, and if you can't make it, we can coordinate somebody else to attend. But that's our plan. If that's okay with you all.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
I can, Dean, I think you're on twice in a row because it was assumed that I would be out of the country, but I'm not. So I could cover for May 14. This is Dean Verenkamp was down for that.
I can still make that if you want to pretend you're out of the country, that's fine. Otherwise, yeah, you can take it. I've got no issues.
I'm going to let you decide, Dean, because you took it on as a favor to me. So if you'd like me to pick it back up again, I can. If you want to just keep it, you can too. Just I'm going to let you decide how you want to proceed.
Let's just leave it the way it is, then you don't need to pay me back. How's that?
Okay. All right. So you'll be covering for 514 then.
Yes. And then my question
Okay,
is
thank
that
you.
will I receive a packet for that?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay. Is there any dates that people can see that need to be addressed as far as the change?
Nope.
Any conflicts? Okay. All right. Well, if that is it, we'll move to adjournment. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I so move. Shulak.
Okay.
I'll
Second.
second that word.
All right. Roll call vote. Chair Jacobs, yay. Commissioner Dickman.
Commissioner Dickman, yay, and special thanks to Mike for being on city premises to adhere to state statutes. So thanks, Mike, for being at City Hall.
Very good. Commissioner Shulak.
Commissioner Shulak, yay.
Commissioner Verenkamp.
Mr. Verenkamp, yay.
And Commissioner Wu.
Yes.
Okay, well, I don't know what to say. I think this went well. And again, appreciate everybody's, willingness to be flexible to join us. And I hope, we were all able to feel like we did our part in this important process. So anything else, speak now. Otherwise, we'll look forward to our next get together.
Good job, folks.